Ready to go? Okay. Before I do that, I cannot start the meeting without making a comment about that magnificent sky as we were all coming to the meeting. Did you see that? Did it just like excite you and give you all kinds of energy? It was just amazing. Yeah, it was just like, okay, we got to talk about this. So as long as you experienced it and it filled your soul, and it's going to move us on to lots of work here tonight. So I will call the meeting to order at 7:05. And if you are a guest this evening, will you please stand? Any guests here tonight? Excellent. Thank you so much for coming. Very good. Wow. Every meeting lately, we have some new people who are stopping in and hopefully becoming members. And we have one elected tonight, and that is Barbara Schulman. Now, I will caution you that you only have one more year when she's going to be in the audience as an elected, and her term as school board is finished in just 1 year. So just to give you a heads up about that. Now, announcement for those of you that are new to us, make sure when you leave tonight, you look around, and if you see any papers, will you please collect them, and we will recycle those. We like to leave the room as we find it. Be good guests here. Okay, now this is important for any of our guests. I think the rest of you know this by now, that this is not a public forum, but is a limited forum where access is restricted to club members and their guests to conduct business. And please remember that any pictures that are taken this evening may become public. Now, before we do the Pledge of Allegiance, Barbara's here as an elected, but often we have Susie Schwartz. And the reason that I want to pause here is I got a text message this week. I was off in Canada doing Thanksgiving and all of that, and Susie wanted to find a t-shirt for Yes on 50. So of course we send them to our great fundraising team, but the reason she wanted the t-shirt, her 100-year-old mother was going to No Kings in San Diego and wanted to be appropriately dressed. So lest I caution you, and that would be all of us, when you think, I don't know if I want to do that, just realize this 100-year-old woman is going out to the No Kings rally. That was amazing. All right, Barbara, will you please lead us in the pledge this evening? Right there, do not doubt us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, so now we are going to adopt a consent calendar, and that would include tonight's agenda. We obviously have a quorum here. The meetings, you can see our Secretary Janice Vatz from the last meeting if you would like to see those. And then let me show you our treasurer's report. This is very exciting. All of you that are in this room right now and who are members have been contributing to our deposits. And you can see that we are doing well. This month we had over $4,000 worth of deposits. And of that, 1,180 has come from our sustaining members. So all of us who are members, sustaining or otherwise, are helping to fuel that money. Now for expenses, you will see we had quite a few big expenses this month, but let me show you that we had 13,000 total. And what that was all about is we've already paid for our room, the room that we're sitting in right now, for the next year. So we're all paid up, ready to go, and appreciate all that they do for us. And then the other thing is $600 worth of insurance. So we as a club have insurance should anything happen. We are covered. We need to make sure that we do that. And then last meeting, you voted to donate $2,500 to Mike Levin's campaign. So I think that was the first of our donations to campaigns, and that will be heating up, especially after we win the yes on Prop 30. We'll switch to candidates. 50, what did I say? Oh, yeah, yes on 50, sorry. There's no 30 on the ballot anyway, just yes, yeah, okay. Okay, now, if you have not voted and you are a member, will you please make sure that you go to the back and vote for our reps that will be going to the convention, and then we'll have some candidates that we can support on our level. Okay, so for my report, okay, so that, yes? Sorry? Oh, I announced it, but I will announce it again, that there is a raffle going on down there for the, over where Melora is, for the Halloween basket, $25 Trader Joe gift certificate, and lots of other goodies. So make sure you stop by and contribute, because that also adds to our income. And yes, so for the CADM reps, make sure that you vote this evening, and don't feel compelled to vote for all of them, like, oh, I'm not going to vote because I don't know all of these people, but just make sure you vote, okay? Okay, let's see. So for my report, relatively short, October 1, we had a spur of the moment rally that was all about Prop 50, and many of you came out, and I want to especially thank Cindy Ashley and JJ, because within 24 hours, they created a Mobilize, they created stuff to go out on all of our social media, to email to all of you, etc., and come up with the phrase and come up with the information. So that was a great turnaround, and thank you very, very much. And then No Kings, great success, as our newsletter says. Over 7 million throughout the nation were there. And I talked to a couple people tonight. They had questions and things like that. And I mentioned the newsletter. They go, oh, the newsletter? Well, when does that come out? Reminder, every Sunday afternoon, Monday morning, you should be looking at your email and looking at the newsletter. Cindy and Jackie and Nancy and her crew do a fabulous job of keeping us up to date of what we need to know for that week. So please do, yes, exactly. Okay, now for our committee report, okay, Louise and her team have been working nonstop, so now we are coming to the conclusion, but we have to keep going all the way. Okay. Okay. So it's on your computer. Just slide it up. Oh, here, why don't you get talking and I'll do that. Okay. I don't need this. I don't need this to.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to know if there's anybody in the audience who has been making phone calls for Prop 50. Has anybody been making phone calls for Prop 50? 1 or 2 people. It is in the newsletter. If you want to work from home and make phone calls, it's very productive and easy to do. Okay, so how many of you have actually walked door to door? Stand up. Okay, these people are getting it done. And I think there are people in here who've gone well over 100 doors. Okay, so this particular slide I wrote when I was really feeling a bummer with what's going on. If we do nothing, our governor said, God help us if we do nothing and Prop 50 doesn't pass. Children in Africa will die for lack of food and medicine the US is no longer supplying. Research on cancer and other major health problems will be shut down. It's already happening. Environmental rules will be meaningless due to a lack of enforcement, also already happening. History taught in our schools will be whitewashed. MAGA Republicans will continue to be the majority in Congress. But if you do nothing, we can tell our friends and family that we were very busy and probably could not have made a difference. That is not true. Everybody in this room can make a difference. Thank you, Janet. So there's something everybody can do. You can talk to your friends and neighbors about the importance of Prop 50. Maybe not be so dystopian as I am, but a little more update. I'm sorry, it's hard to hold this thing up because I have a bum wing from when I fell. You can put a sign in your yard. If you don't have one, make one. Wear a Yes on 50 button. I think they're selling them and they have signs over there. And you can use the links in the newsletter to sign up and make phone calls or to walk. Go ahead. If you want to make phone calls, this is what's in our newsletter. And if you want the information right now, you can point the camera in your phone at the QR code on the right, and it will take you to the link to make phone calls. So this is very easy to do, and they provide a lot of education and support. So we have been working very hard. Total doors knocked by Canyon Dems between 9/12 and 10/12 was 3,575. However, we ordered 17,000 door hangers. Our walkers are very productive. Our canvassers got 71% yes when they talked to someone, and canvassers in the rest of the county only got 68%. So we are the golden-tongued walkers. We gave Costa del Sol over 800 door hangers and paperless to walk. And the DPOC reports that we had 59 people walking between 10/6 and 10/12. 35 were canvassers from our event in RSM, and 24 of them are free-range walkers, people who picked up literature and go out on their own in their own neighborhood or wherever they want to walk. So if you are a free-range walker, would you please stand up? Yay! Okay, now, folks, those of you who have been sitting there are not off the hook, because we came up with a plan while we were sitting around waiting for walkers to come back 2 weeks ago. We made packets of 25 door hangers. I have 100 of them in that box. It will only take a couple hours of your time to get those door hangers on doors. And we're going to make it so easy, anybody can do it. We can reach 2,500 doors by what you agree to do tonight. You can just put them on neighbors' doors. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to know anything about them. You just hang the door hanger on the door. That's the least effective thing you can do of the other options. But if it gets it on the door and nobody else is going to go there, it's 100% better than nothing, okay? Or you can use the PDI app on your phone to just talk to Democrats and no party preference vote, or just leave them on their doors. You don't even have to talk to them. And we have people here tonight who have these blue tags on that says help with PDI, and at the end of the meeting, wave your hand, Jenny. Okay, everybody with a blue tag can help you get on PDI, okay? And it's real easy to do. You step out of your front door, you turn PDI on, and it starts giving you doors to hang door hangers on. And you don't have to talk to a soul, okay? Or if you want to do more than that, and you want to walk, knock on the door and talk to people, Jenny can set you up with that as well. So there's everybody who leaves this place tonight needs to take at least a packet of 25. If you can do more than 25, we have enough to share, okay? So are you gonna be one of the people who says, I was too busy and it probably wouldn't make a difference? My question to you is, are you gonna make a difference? We're at the end now, and we can't depend on anybody else to fix this. We have to fix it ourselves. Thank you very much.
There you go.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I seem to have problems with the microphone. I'm really technologically challenged. My name is Judy. Yes, Judy. You can't hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Woo! Okay. If you don't know me, my name is Judy Fike, and I am the candidate recruiter and support for our club. I've replaced Janet, who moved up to chair, and I agreed that I would help out with the candidate recruitment. If you'll allow me a minute or so to digress, because there is method to my madness, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in an activist family. I was blessed to have a mother who was influenced by her Episcopalian and Methodist forebears that we needed to take care of one another. And so our family discussions included civil rights, the murder of the 3 civil rights workers in Money, Mississippi. My brothers thought it was hilarious that whenever I played Cowboys and Indians, and I had those little plastic figures, when I played Cowboys and Indians, the Indians always won. There's my mom, and there's just something in my DNA from a very young age that encouraged me to reach out and to help other people. And I think one of the highlights of my life was having the opportunity, I hope I don't cry, having the opportunity to campaign for Robert Kennedy, not the nutcase now, but his father. I was fortunate enough to go to college in Massachusetts, and a friend reached out to me and said, come on, I want you to meet Senator Kennedy. I want you to canvass for him. And I did that. And it was really a highlight for me. And the day I came home for summer break, the news on the television told me that Bobby Kennedy had been murdered. And I was absolutely devastated. And of course, I went to college in the 60s, so I protested the war in Vietnam. I was involved in the civil rights movements, graduated from college, got married, had kids, got a career, and really didn't think about activism for a really long time. Then Barack Obama got elected, and I thought, oh my God, we have actually turned a page here. A Black man is now the president of the United States. I was euphoric until 2016 when we got Donald Trump. I have a feeling when I'm telling you, you're all nodding your head and saying, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So we need to beat these people back, not beat them, but we need to defeat them, folks. And I'm going to try to give you a little, I don't know, rah-rah speech like Louise did. We need all of you to help. You're saying, I can't do it. Yes, you can. Make phone calls. Walk to your neighbors' houses and talk to them. But if we all say, I can't do it, we won't do it. So I'm going to ask you, I have a favor of all of you, finally to the point. As a candidate recruiter, we are looking for good people to run, and primarily the city council offices. So if you know somebody who's talked about running for city council, if you're interested in running for city council, you can get a hold of me, and it's pretty easy to remember. Oh, no, I'm ahead. Okay, that's all right. It'll be on the next slide. But there it is. No, that's the wrong. Never mind. Okay, it's on your itinerary. It's candidate@canyondems.org. It's very simple. Okay. We have a process here in this club for running for office. And it's not something that we made up. We are a charter club. And because we're a charter club, that means we have to follow certain rules set out by the California Democratic Party and the Orange County Democratic Party. So for one thing, be careful. I can't say we are endorsing so-and-so. I can say we're supporting this person, but only the California Democratic Party and the Orange County Democratic Party, only they have the power to endorse. So once they endorse candidates, then we are obligated to support those people. Now, as far as the local candidates are concerned, we support candidates. And how do we do that? Well, we can't run a campaign for you. We don't have the bandwidth for that. What we can do is help you get started in your campaign. I can tell you, this person is the person you want to talk to. Have you considered doing this? We also have seed money for potential candidates. And so we can help to get you started. But I'm asking all of you, if you have any questions, please come to me. We're already having situations where people are saying, well, Judy said this. No, I didn't. I didn't say that. And this is where we get the ugly part of campaigning. It's really important that our club come across as organized and truthful. And if we have individuals going off on their own and contacting candidates, then we're not sending out a unified message. So, in review, if you're interested in running, please, please, please. We have some interested parties in Mission Viejo, but they're kind of, I'm going to look into it, I'm going to think about it. And we possibly have some candidates in Lake Forest and RSM. We don't have any candidates in Laguna Hills. Where are you people? Come on. We need to get candidates elected to local offices. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much that you're here. Thank you for your interest. I'm so happy that I'm tired. I'm tired of this fight that I thought was over, but we have to keep fighting and don't give up. Thank you.
Okay, and then for membership, we are up 20 members this month. We're getting close to 800. So maybe some of our new guests here this evening might want to sign up and get us over the hump for 800. Much appreciated. That would be good. And then we should be at fundraising. Oh, no, is it fundraising? Nope, that's membership. Okay, outreach, there she is. I should have known, she's standing over there, right? Exactly.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Ann Owens. And for those of you who are new, every month our club does a collection for a local nonprofit. This month it was South Orange County Outreach. And you've been extremely, extremely generous. It's a way for us to show the community that Democrats care about people. And it's a way also to get our name out into the community so people know more about us. In November, I'm kind of switching things up from the last few years for Christmas, from what I've done about the last 5 years. This year, we're going to do toys for tots. And what they need are toys for little kids, like toddlers, teenagers. I know, they're so easy to buy for. And they will take gift cards to Target and Walmart for $25. I'm going to tell you this because this is going to be your goal. Last year, I did a collection like this. This club gave me last year $2,000 in gift cards. So I was overwhelmed. So that's a big bar I'm setting for you. Also, last year I got a lot of bikes. So I asked the Marines basically if they still would take bikes, and they said, oh, we would love bikes. So if you are bringing something like a bicycle or a Barbie house, something that's big, please do not bring it to the meeting next month. Go to Ann Owens at cox.net and tell me and bring it to my house, and we will put it in my house, because the Marines are actually going to come to my house and pick everything up for me. So I'm hoping we can have a huge, overwhelming collection of toys and gift cards that we can give to them. Okay, thank you.
Hello, Canyon Dems and friends. How you doing? Guess what? 377 days until the midterms are over. It's not as long a time as you think. It's going to happen really, really fast. Did everybody have a chance to get their tickets for their drawing? We have a cool Halloween basket, and it's got a 6-pack of Oktoberfest beer and a $25 Trader Joe's gift certificate. If you didn't get a chance, raise your hand and we'll make sure somebody gets to you. Okay, we got somebody in the middle. Can we get somebody over here? Okay, and somebody over here. Patty's got it? Okay. All right. So we have a sustaining donor program. And basically what that is we have some members that are able to give a little bit more than their regular membership cost. And so they give an extra $5 or $10 or $500 a month, whatever they can afford, and little bits of money add up. And so now we are at the point where we have, that's right, $11,885 just from our sustaining donors. So if you're a sustaining donor, raise your hand, because you have made that possible. That's enough to support 2 or 3 candidates to the amount that the maximum that we're allowed to give, right? Is it like 2,500 is the max? Different for, okay, well, that'll support a lot of candidates. That's impressive. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, is the big announcement next, Miss Janet? Yes, it is. Okay, I'm so excited. Our Richard O'Neill brunch, it's named for an OG Republican, and our speaker is going to be John Bowser Bauman. We are so excited. And here comes, okay. And if you don't know John Bauman, he used to be with Shanana. Remember Shanana? Everybody dance. Who remembers? Who remembers?
Come on, raise your hand if you know this song.
Rock and roll is here to stay. Come on. All right. But now he's the president of the Social Security Works PAC and also the vice chair of the DNC Seniors Council. So he's got cred. So he's going to be our speaker. We are so excited that we're going to have him. And because we've got a terrific speaker, we are probably going to sell out this year. We have a limited number of seats at the O'Neill Brunch. It's a lot of fun. We have a great time. But because we have a whole lot more people now who are members than we've had before, you might want to think about getting your tickets early, because the last possible day to buy a ticket will be December 5th, no exceptions. Unless we sell out early, then we're done. So that's the deal. If you want to come and see Bowser, you got to get your tickets early. They go on sale tomorrow, so you'll be able to find them on our website. We are also going to have our sponsorship levels. And so the first level will be $100 for a snowflake, and you get one ticket to the brunch for that. Second level is $250, a snowball, and you get 2 tickets. For $500, you'll be a blizzard and get 4 tickets. And for $1,000 to buy a table, you'll be an avalanche. So pick the level that you want to do, and then single tickets will be $80 for members. The price is $85 a person, but because members get a discount, it'll be $80 for our members. And we need, thank you to everybody who's bringing wine. We are so excited. We have our wine wall, and that's a really good help for. Can use some more wine. Yeah, we can always use more wine. We may have some after the meeting, you don't know, not from our donations. And also gift cards and experiences and any kinds of stuff that you might think we would be able to use for our baskets for our opportunities and our silent auction items. And our hoedown. We were going to have it this month, and we decided that yes, on Prop 50 was ever so much more important than a hoedown. So we moved it to March 14th. So put that on your calendars, because we'll be doing that. And that'll be here at the Murray Center. We got new merch. And actually, our merch maven, Patty, brought our stuff to the rally on Saturday and sold almost $2,000 worth of stuff. She's amazing. Everybody give Patty a hand, because she's a freaking amazing. And now we will do the drawing. We need the ticket. Oh, that's right. She's got a little spiel.
The rosé again. Okay. You know, we guys on our team like to have a lot of fun. We are looking for a few good volunteers. We are putting together a new little committee. It's called the Fun Squad, and we're asking these people to sign up to help us occasionally at events. If you sign up, you don't have to do every event. If you can't make one, we'll put you at the bottom of the list. We don't want to have like 10 people show up if we only need 3, because we don't want people standing around. So we're going to try to maintain this list and give the opportunity. So if it's something you might want to do once in a while, like say you're not required to do everything, then sign up. And the best part is, have a little happy hour at my house for those people doing it. And that's going to be on Wednesday, the 12th of November, 5 to 7. If you're interested in doing this, please come back to me at tonight when the meeting's over, and I'll have you sign up, and I'll get your email and contact, and I will send you the information to come to the meeting. Even if you maybe cannot come to the meeting that night, we would still like you to sign up, and on the next day or so after, I'll put together a little blip about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and I'll send it out so everybody's included. So we have a lot of fun, and if you want to help out once in a while, and we have fun working hard too, please sign up, and you'll be a big help to us, because we're growing so big now, we need a little help. So thank you all very much. And there'll be wine. Okay. Let me go get the
Okay. They're still selling a few tickets, so we can do it at the end. I don't want to waste time, so why don't you go ahead and do the next thing, and then we can do it later.
We can go back to this.
Just remind me so that. Yeah. And the voting squad is counting the ballots right now. So if you still have a ballot, there are about 10 ballots outstanding. So if you will just wave it in the air, we've got Mike and JJ, and that looks like good. And then we'll be hoping to announce tonight. It's tedious job tallying, but I think it's going to work. Oh, you're ready? Okay, so they're ready to announce the winner of the basket. And then keep your ballots in the air, and this will be perfect.
So you know, we dumped everything in here so we can mix them up really good. So
Good job.
all right, here we go. So this is for our Halloween basket, and everyone get your tickets. Here we go. Ready?
The lucky winner is 065303. It's blue.
It's blue.
Yay! We have a winner. Thank you. You don't have to sit with it in your lap, so just come in. Thank you.
Okay, so no report from communications, but I do want to remind you that these are all of the platforms that we're on. So please keep checking those and stay updated. We have many, many ways for you to stay in the loop. Actually, there's no report from our newsletter writers. These are people who work within the community at the grassroots. So Cindy works in RSM, Andy works in Lake Forest. Let's see, Kristen, where are you? She works in Lake Forest. No, she works in Mission Viejo, sorry. And then Francine is working in Laguna Hills, and we need someone for the unincorporated. So the advantage of that is the news that these individual people send out has to do what's going on there. And it engages you, and if there's something that you need to know about, then it helps you on your very local level. Now, for example, this month or last month, Andy had some success at the Lake Forest City Council where she had requested a fire mitigation update from the Southern California Edison. And the minute we say fire around here, right, it's like, yeah. And so that is going to happen. And those are the things that these people do when going to the city council. You know, sometimes nothing goes on, and then sometimes a lot goes on, but every little bit of action works, and every little bit of action matters. Okay, so now JJ, he's got a lot going on tonight. He's helping us with the elections, and then he has some news about a new activity for our Canyon Young Dems. Oh, we do? Okay. Oh, okay, go on, finish.
All right. So unfortunately, Gamecraft Brewing closed. That's where we had our monthly happy hours, but there are other places to drink beer in the district. So, so what we're doing actually is our next happy hour is Thursday of next week, October 30th. But we're taking the opportunity of the fact that there was a change in venue to do something a little bit different. And we're actually getting together to do some phone banking for Yes on Prop 50. So it's going to be a wine and phone banking night at a home. So do we have the QR code is in the... So the QR code is on the agenda. So if you're interested in participating, all are welcome. So if you guys would like to join, just make sure that you RSVP, because we just have to keep track of how many people are coming to make sure that we have enough space. But that's what we're doing next week. So Yes on Prop 50.
Okay, which is a good reminder, is we have the information on the PowerPoints, but it's all on your piece of paper as well. So when you walk out, anything that was up here and probably more is on the agenda. So please take that with you for emails, for QR codes, for dates, all of that. And then we do have another elected in the House. Raise your hand, Cynthia. And some of you know her as our fighter for democracy on the Mission Viejo City Council. She is the lone Dem, and it's a tough, tough job out there. And we want to thank you very much for doing that. So in just a minute, I'm going to take a 1-minute break to get Dr. Barnes's PowerPoint up here on my computer. And in the interim, you can look and see on your agenda and up here the speakers who are going to be here in the next couple of months. We've got Victor Valadares, we have Robert Page, and we have Mary Thomas Valens. So if you'll indulge me for just a minute, I'll get that up for Dr. Barnes and tell you a little bit about it. Some of you might know. Okay, thank you for your indulgence, and thank you to Dr. Barnes, a professor who just kind of helped me with the technology in true teaching form. So thank you very, very much. Okay, so a little bit about Dr. Mario Barnes. How many of you have heard Dr. Mario Barnes before? Yes, he does a lot of speaking. And has come to UCI actually as a former dean and professor up at the University of Washington School of Law. And then he has come down here to UCI as the Chancellor's Professor of Law at UCI. He's nationally recognized for research in legal and social implications on race and gender, and a leader in seeking to build strong connections between empirical studies and critical race theory. He writes, he teaches, as we can attest to here this evening, and he does teaching for criminal law, constitutional law, national security, and other areas. And we are lucky to have him here tonight because we are all very concerned, are we not, about the death of the rule of law. Well, he's got some information for us that hopefully we leave here a little bit buoyed, but then also cautious. So let's hear from Dr. Barnes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Janet and to the Canyon Democrats for inviting me here to speak. I have to say, as somebody who teaches and writes in constitutional law since January 20th, the question I have received, and I've received it in various forms, but it's some form of the question, are we in a constitutional crisis? Are we on the brink of the death of democracy? Do we have a government that has decided that the rule of law, which is a premise that this nation is founded upon, is no longer something that they are bound by? And so this presentation is built off a presentation I gave to our entering 1L students this year because the administration at UCI was concerned that law students were coming in with a foreboding sense of hopelessness, a sense that there had been drastic changes in our government recently that did not look like anything they were familiar with in their lifetime, and that suggested to them that perhaps the careers they were preparing for, students who wanted to be able to make a difference, but subject to rules, to laws, to constitutional doctrine, were fearing that there was a changing of the tide. And so I gave this presentation not to be a bomb or a salve, but actually to educate them so that they could answer for themselves the question, are we in a constitutional crisis? Are we at the end of the democracy as we know it? What will we need to know to figure out whether the administration, in fact, has lost respect for the rule of law? So, okay, so just to probably go back one. Okay, so before I start talking about the rule of law, we need a little primer. So the weird thing is, I always call this a primer, but my students never fail to go, what? But this is a basic primer on the structure of government in the United States as laid out by the Constitution, right? So, and all this means is one of the wonderful innovations of our constitutional democracy is that it was built on a premise of shared power between the various structures of our government, which we loosely refer to as Congress or the legislative, the president or the executive, and the judiciary. And the whole point of our Constitution is it creates both assignments of power and then types of redundancy between those entities so that what? No one entity becomes too powerful and that all three entities remain accountable to at least two other structures. One, state governments, and most importantly, people. So the primer goes like this. The power of Congress is articulated in the Constitution in two spaces. Article 1, which gives the individualized power of Congress, and then what we call the Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th, post the Civil War, designed actually to give Congress the power to enforce the new amendments to the Constitution. The president's power is articulated in Article 2. One of the great innovations and now probably problems with our Constitution is that there is a very small amount of language in Article 2. What the president is actually endowed with the power to do is very little. He basically is required to faithfully execute the law, and then he has some role in appointing officials in terms of consular officials and also in appointing executives and administrators. But most of what he is supposed to do is run an executive department, which is supposed to be tied to filling out or taking care to execute the executive and legislative will of the country. But there's not a lot of language defining how he or she is to do that, which means there aren't a lot of limits or prohibitions on executive power. And we're constantly trying to figure out where lines are and defining when a president may or may not do something. And lots of what we get in terms of rule of law claims are about the president is not able or not allowed to do that. And mostly when people say that, what they mean is, we have not seen a president do that before. Well, this president is very interested in doing many things you've never seen before. It does not mean, however, that they are necessarily violations of the rule of law. And part of what I want my students to be able to do is figure out the difference. So finally, the judiciary, easy. Article 3 endows the federal judiciary with the power to review essentially all federal law, and the role of the courts in separation of powers matters is supposed to be a bit of a referee or arbiter between disputes of the other branches, right? Between all of the other branches, the executive and the legislature, the federal and the state governments and the people. The court, I teach famously the Marbury versus Madison case as the first case in constitutional law. It's the first case I learned. It's the first case I teach. And in it, Mr. Chief Justice Marshall says that it is the domain of the court to say what law is. Now, that doesn't say that anywhere in the Constitution, but he proclaimed it. And since then, part of what we understand that the court can do is to attempt to negotiate, using constitutional language, the roles of the various branches, including an ability to review executive action and an ability to review legislative action, even though the Constitution doesn't include language that says the court can. And then finally, remember before there was the United States, we had a loose amalgam of sovereigns that were joined by an agreement that did not work very well because everybody essentially had the power to do what they wanted. And so what happened is the beauty of the Constitution is both that it created a federal or unified government, but it did not end entirely the sovereignty of what we call the several states. And actually in the Constitution, what we see is the 10th and 11th Amendment preserve some arc of power for the state, right? The 10th Amendment basically says any power that is not ceded to the federal government remains with the states. And then the 11th Amendment gives states the power to have sovereign immunity in a way in which at least individual states still have a pretty broad power to prevent themselves from being sued and subjected to certain types of civil action. And then finally, it's the last one, but many people would suggest the most important part of this whole structure is us. We the people, which is the starting phrase of the preamble of the Constitution. Now, note that we were not provided for in the first several articles of the Constitution. It's not until we get to the Bill of Rights, which are the first 9 amendments, that we see that the Constitution specifically speaks to a number of important rights and privileges which will be protected from government intrusion. Now, we are a negative liberty constitution. And what that means is the rights protected in the Bill of Rights means the government shall not, in many instances, encroach upon our rights. It does not require the government to give us the capacity to fulfill or carry out our rights. They are not required to create the means for us to exercise our rights. That's what you do here. That is what your service is, to empower people with the ability to exercise their vital rights. What the government is supposed to do is not encroach upon your rights unless they have a really, really good reason and they're doing it in a really, really narrow fashion. So this is the basic structure which gives life to this concept of the rule of law. There's a global definition, and then there's a much more specific kind of what we call a normative definition when people think of rule of law. So the broadest definition of rule of law is not about a specific statute or regulation. It's this concept that there are, in a democratic society, norms and institutions which embrace universal principles that require in any government accountability, just law, open government, and accessible and impartial justice. This is a global standard. So when we used to have something, so I spent many years, 23 of them, in the United States Navy, and we had something called ROLI, Rule of Law Institute. Part of what we did in those years was to send legal teams around the world to try to convince other countries to invest in democratic structures. And when we would use principles such as this global definition of the rule of law to suggest to them that rule of law was about a broad commitment societally to a set of norms that would produce, we hoped, a Republican form of government, or at least a commitment to a representative one where the government respected as legitimately limits on its own power. Now that's the broad and kind of that international understanding of rule of law. In the United States, when we say rule of law, we mean something much more basic. When we talk about rule of law here, what we are asking is everyone held accountable to be subject to the law? And when we say everyone, we already know we are. Goodness knows, we are always subject to law. When we say is everybody being held accountable, we mean our structures, including our lawmakers, the executive, the legislature, is everyone captured by being held accountable to law, even when the law would limit their power or otherwise is inconsistent with their wishes. In other words, in our society, even where Congress and the president have agendas, goals, political sort of visions, it should be limited by our existing understanding of what our statutes, our Constitution, and our commitments under treaties provide for. So the basic notion is everybody's got to follow the law. The most common complaint under the rule of law is that some, usually the executive, is not doing something that is required either by a statute or according to a court order. And we mostly talk about executive action in this space, mostly because it is the office of the executive and the president that is the most nimble of our sort of the tripart union of our government, right? The Congress is slow moving, the courts are responsive. It is the executive who's often a first mover. And so often when people are alleging a rule of law violation, the claim is basically the president or an agency head is doing something that we don't like and we believe is not lawful. The most common form of that complaint goes something like this. The language of the Constitution requires the US president to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, and I believe whatever they're doing now is not consistent with that faithful execution. That is the basic ubiquitous claim. The Constitution says you uphold the law, you are not doing that. Where does the law come from? The Constitution, federal statutes, and ratified treaties. Those things are not suggestions. They are not mere puffery. They have the ability and should be understood as limiting the power of the executive like they limit the power of everyone else. Now, what I try to teach my students is, even though that is the ubiquitous claim, what we have to understand is the only things that are technically and actually rule of law involve situations where there is constitutional or legislative text which gives us no space for interpretation in what the options are for the president. Which is to say, constitutional language and statutory language, by their very nature, are often open to interpretation. And if there is any space of interpretation, presidents will mostly claim what you think about that language is wrong, what I think about that language is right. I am faithfully executing, you just don't understand it to be that way. I'm right, you're wrong, go away. So what happens? Well, here's what normally happens, and I am here to tell you, this is the part that hasn't completely fallen away yet. The president often does something which the pushback or challenge is, it is not our historical understanding that that is something that you're allowed to do, and what it mostly produces is a lawsuit. And typically what happens is you take it to usually a federal court, and we get 3 levels of review. A district court will pronounce whether something is consistent with the rule of law. It will go to an appellate court, and then ultimately our Supreme Court will tell us yes or no. But the truth is, what we call the first move, the president deciding to do something which we might think is inconsistent with prior statute, constitutional text, or a treaty, the first move in and of itself does not produce a violation of the rule of law unless you have a court order which says, we have previously interpreted this text and what you're doing now is not allowed. So unless there is on all fours a court order which says you may not do the thing you're doing, it is not clear that there is a rule of law violation. You cannot get technically a rule of law violation until such time as a president or an executive actor has acted and then been told by a court that their actions are inconsistent with the state of the law. And at that point, what should happen is the action is enjoined, which means stopped, stayed, temporarily held in abeyance until you get a pronouncement by an appellate court and ultimately the Supreme Court. Now, here's what used to happen all the time. District courts make a ruling, the federal government then goes to the appellate court, makes a ruling, and then finally, if the federal government is still unhappy, it will go to the Supreme Court. That is how most of the cases got to the Supreme Court. That is not what is happening since January 20th of this year. So what's happening since January 20th of this year is there's been quite a few district courts that have ruled against the presidential action as lawful or enjoined it or stayed it. And then what happens is the Department of Justice or the Solicitor General move immediately to move the matter to what we call the emergency or shadow docket. The emergency or shadow docket is a place where the Supreme Court has historically decided a handful of cases a year on an emergency basis. Typically 20 to 30 cases a year get entertained on the shadow docket. I think as of today, the Trump administration has made 120 appeals to the shadow docket. That means 120 times they have disliked something that's happened in a district court, and instead of waiting to litigate it in the tried and true manner that we typically do, they basically are going into the Supreme Court and asking them to do something or undo something. It is actually the part of this that is producing a bit of a problem for constitutional scholars, because until quite recently, we used to tell our students that things that come off the shadow docket have low precedential value, right? They're supposed to be unique emergency items for which their value in governing future cases of this kind is more limited than things that come up through our regular appellate process. And the Supreme Court used to endorse that. They do not appear to be doing that anymore. So here's what I have to tell you that is why I term this, why we are not, why there's not been the death of the rule of law, at least not for now. The thing that I should tell you all is President Trump is not unique in his desire to execute power that may or may not be inconsistent with the understanding of previous cases or the constitutional text. All presidents at some point will do something for which it is arguable that they are acting outside of what we understand as the approved way to do that if we are going to say they are faithfully executing. And it does not matter if you are a Democrat or a Republican, all presidents make claims that attempt to expand presidential power. So my former life was as a judge advocate general in the Navy. The example I give my students all the time, which has captured every president since Nixon, is the War Powers Resolution. I like this room because you actually know what that is. Unlike my students. You will remember in the wake of Vietnam, what we get is a joint resolution informed of the War Powers Resolution, or Act of 73, the intent of which was what? To force the executive to check with Congress before it did major military deployments. We did not want another Vietnam, right? The accidental war. Actually, technically, it's not a war, it's a conflict because we never declared war. But the whole point of it, so what does it require? It requires when the president deploys arms or troops of a certain type that they must make a report to Congress. If they're going to be there more than a certain number of days, they must come back to Congress and seek approval or risk having it defunded. And so every president since Nixon has said some form of the War Powers Resolution is inconsistent with my authority as Commander-in-Chief of the military and head of foreign affairs for the nation. Most presidents since Nixon have taken some action which a commonplace reading of which suggests violates the War Powers Resolution, meaning that the claim would be, well, you didn't follow the reporting requirements, you did not seek congressional approval of this, and the conflict continued on. And what every president says is, this is consistent with my Article 2 power. Congress says, well, the War Powers Resolution passed dutifully under Article 1 is a valid law that you're violating. The only way for rule of law purposes we could really decide this would be for the court to tell us whether it is the congressional power in the War Powers Resolution or the executive power in Article 2 which prevails in these instances. What has the Supreme Court said about this? Nothing, never. They have never been willing to hear a challenge of the War Powers Resolution. So every time a president does something which is inconsistent with the War Powers Resolution, the question of whether there's a rule of law violation is on the table. It cannot be answered until you get a court. The current president would say, no court but the Supreme Court, I would imagine. He seems to have a bit of disrespect for the rulings of district courts. But nothing but a determination by a court that some action violates the War Powers Resolution, what the court would deem to be a legitimate exercise of congressional power, would work. And so what I tell my students is a lot of times what you're responding to is the notion that what the president is doing is captured by two things that give you pause. One, he's doing something that other presidents haven't done before. That immediately gives us pause because we think the reason they haven't done it before is because it's ill-advised. Two, he's doing something inconsistent with the way that you interpret the statute or the language of the Constitution or the text of the statute or the treaty. And the truth is, it may be the case that you're right, but until you get a court pronouncing that you're right, it is not a rule of law violation. It is just some executive action that you don't like very much. Okay, so we have some other recent examples where people make claims that, well, what the president is doing is a violation of the rule of law because it's inconsistent with the prior readings of other presidents. I am sorry to tell you that the prior readings of statutes of other presidents and their way in which they interpreted things with their administration is not binding on future administrations. It's not. Until a court says that it's something that violates an existing statute or the Constitution, it's not binding. So lots of what's happening now is disturbing people because it is inconsistent with what we have seen in the past. That alone does not make it a rule of law violation. So here's examples from our most recent Republican and our most recent Democratic president, both cases where both were accused of violating the rule of law. So with President Trump in his first administration, we had the Muslim ban. He used an executive order to suspend travel from 7 majority Muslim nations for individuals attempting to come into the US. A president had never done so before under the statute he was using. The Immigration and Naturalization Act allowed the president to place limited restrictions on immigration related to a security threat. But a president had never said before that you were a threat to security because you were attempting to enter from a particular nation, which he deemed many would argue, based on his beliefs about the faith of a predominant group of people, to be dangerous. And so many people say, that's a rule of law violation. The INA doesn't give him that power, and moreover, it's a violation of the First Amendment to discriminate against them based on your belief about their religion. So I would have said, well, it's not a rule of law violation until the court tells us that he's violating the INA or the Constitution, because even though no president has done this before, that alone is insufficient. What did the court say in Trump versus Hawaii? His Muslim ban was constitutional. Why? He said that the language in the statute that Congress delegated to the president allowed him to assess the security threat of those who were attempting to immigrate or to come into the country, and that, this is my favorite part, despite the fact that when he was running for president, he had made derogatory remarks about Muslims and the Islam faith, they said they would not use that as evidence of an immoral or improper reason for the ban when he made the claim in the papers that he was doing it for legitimate security reasons. So they rejected that there was a constitutional First Amendment problem based on discrimination based on religion, and they said the statute itself, the statute basically says, President, please assess the security risk, said the statute itself deferred the power to him. I read that and thought to myself, this is a really broad reading of that statute, but it means that the president was not wrong, at least in terms of a rule of law violation, when they acted to create a Muslim ban that many constitutional commentators, including myself, initially said, this is terrible and it's absolutely a problem, and many said a violation of the rule of law. It's not a violation until you get the court to agree that he's acting outside permissible power. Now, funny, that court that could not see the president acting beyond the scope of his authority in the Muslim ban case came out to a very different conclusion in the debt cancellation case, which is Biden versus Nebraska. So here what you had was a statute that allowed the president in times of emergency to waive or modify student loan debt. So what Biden interpreted that language in the HEROES Act as allowing him to cancel student loan debt because of COVID-19. And the court in that case said the words waive and modify do not mean cancel. And the president is acting way outside of the scope of the statute and intentional in suggesting that, in fact, there was a problem with the president not following the law. And then they created something that suggested in the future, we will be very concerned when the president uses limited statutory language to perfect large political change. They made it up. It's now called the major questions doctrine, which is to say the court says if the president, now here's my thing. Why is it that canceling all debt creates or triggers the major questions doctrine, but they didn't even mention anything when creating a Muslim ban happened 5 years before? It would lead a more skeptical person to suggest that the court is politicized. I, of course, cannot say that to my students and do not say that to my students, so I seek to find other legitimate ways to distinguish these cases when I can, and not today. Okay, so my whole point to you is that some of this is not about politics, Democrat or Republican, but the answer may be political, which is to say, when is it that the court will find some action to be legitimately within the scope of power of the executive versus when they will not? I will tell you historically, the court has not been so politically captured. And the only thing I mean by that today is it has been a very long time since we have had a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court. For many years, we've had 5-4 in either direction. And actually, all it ever took was one justice of an opposing view to shift sides. And there were a lot of justices in the past, Justice O'Connor, Justice Souter, from time to time, Justice Roberts, but not a lot, Justice Kennedy from time to time. What we have now is a solid majority of 6 conservative justices. So even if one of them could be moved, it does not change the outcome of most cases. All right, so I'm now going to do to you what I do with my students, which is give you examples where I get you to try to figure out, based on what I've just told you, how we should think about this in terms of the rule of law. So these are all based on real scenarios. So there's a president who requested from Congress that Congress authorize the U.S. to conduct airstrikes in a region engaged in a military conflict. The House of Representatives voted on it and tied, which means the resolution does not pass and they did not authorize the airstrikes. After the Congress failed to pass the resolution, the president then authorized the airstrikes, claiming to do so pursuant to his Article 2 authority as Commander-in-Chief and the head of Foreign Affairs of the Navy. So he asked Congress to approve it. He got no approval. The strikes went forward. Anyway, is there a violation of the rule of law? Why not? The Congress didn't give him the power to do it. What's wrong with you people? He went to you mean the Congress is just useless? He went there and said, please give me oh, okay, I'm not supposed to ask you that because you're not supposed to answer it that way. So you're not going to be so easy to trick as my less sophisticated students, but you're absolutely right, and it's the devil's in the details. So this was an actual case, Campbell versus Clinton, and it was based on Kosovo, and Campbell was a congressman and came forward and said, the president just violated the rule of law because he violated the will of Congress who denied him permission to do this. And the court actually says, not approving something is not the same thing as affirmatively denying something. So what you did was fail to authorize his strikes. Had you actually passed a resolution that said the president may not, strike in Kosovo, and then the president disobeyed it, that would be a violation of the rule of law. Him merely moving forward where you failed to approve it was not a violation. And then the court, he tries to appeal this further, it gets kicked on standing. Basically, the court says as a congressperson, he cannot prove that the president's actions injured him. But ultimately, think about that. The president says to himself first, I probably need, under the War Powers Resolution, to get permission for these strikes. He then is told, you have no answer because they tied. The new thought is, I have this power already. If you had the power already, why did you ever go to Congress in the first place? I guarantee you the current president is not asking them anything. Because he thinks he is all powerful. So it's like, oh, I don't need that. But the whole point is to get you into the mindset of how the court thinks about this, right? The claim was there's no rule of law violation because there was no affirmative denial of the authority to the president. All right, I try to mix it up, Republican and Democrat, so let's have another one. So here we have the US has a law that prohibits federal authorities from engaging in warrantless surveillance of US persons. This principle was first articulated in something known as the Keith case, or United States versus United States District Court, and later codified in a statute known as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. Under FISA, non-US persons may not, basically may not be surveilled unless you have a warrant. Foreign persons can be surveilled without a warrant. US persons cannot. So, post 9/11, the US president secretly authorized federal agents to conduct the terrorism surveillance program, including warrantless surveillance of US persons. So remember, the Keith case, district court says you can't do it. FISA, still a legitimate statute, says the president cannot do it. Did the TSP involve a rule of law violation where the president is failing to faithfully execute the Constitution? Yes. So, I might agree with you if you ask me. Here's what happened in court. Maybe, and here's why, we don't know why. So the lawyers for President Bush said that he was justified in issuing the warrantless surveillance because in the authorization to use military force post 9/11, Congress gave him the authority to carry out, to do anything he needed to do to carry out the mission against those responsible for 9/11. Most people would tell you that cannot include the power to violate an existing federal statute. But he says, but if you read FISA, FISA says that this power can be limited by further or additional statutes. The problem is the AUMF doesn't say anything about FISA and doesn't say anything about amending it. But here's the real problem. I think if a court had actually had to answer this on what we call the merits, I don't know how they would have found that his action was anything but a violation of the rule of law. But here's where this gets funny, or ironic funny, not haha funny. The case actually gets put out of court on standing, meaning, so the people who sued were people who believed they were being subjected to warrantless wiretapping. They probably were. The problem is the court did not have the power to order the government to turn over the secured findings as to who was being surveilled. And so here's what the judge said in the case. The fact that you cannot prove that you were one of the people actually being surveilled means you do not have standing to challenge this law. So they kicked the case out because the people could not prove they were being subject to the TSP because the government wasn't being required to turn over the classified documents. I'm sorry, it is what happened. And then the president said, you know what? I don't need that tool anymore. I'm just going to get rid of the TSP. So he discontinued the program. Just so you know, the original district court said it is insane that you would do this and then not turn over the documents. Based on my understanding that these are just the type of people who would be surveilled, I am going to find standing. That was the district court. The Court of Appeal threw it out and says you cannot sue. There's a similar case in California that's terrible in a different context, police brutality. There's a famous case in Los Angeles called the City of Los Angeles versus Lyons, where a person was injured by a police who put him in a chokehold, and the person sued to enjoin, which is stop the police from using chokeholds. And the Supreme Court said to that plaintiff, Mr. Lyons, you cannot sue to stop this because you cannot prove that you will be a future victim of another chokehold. And in order to, unfortunately, that is, in other words, so he could get relief or damages for the past chokehold, but he couldn't sue to stop you. You guys look very disappointed. I understand. So my point is, this one I actually think would have been, had they actually been able to review it on the merits. Why? There was a district court case that went to the Supreme Court that said the president may not do this. Congress used that case to pass the FISA statute. Congress clearly had the power to do it. It is absolutely the case that the terrorism surveillance program was violating the mandate of FISA. That is a violation of failing to faithfully execute if you can get a court to be able to review the matter on the merits, which also can be a problem in these cases. Okay, so here's what we have going on now that my students are running into my office to talk about and say, Professor, isn't this a rule of law violation? So, first one, Judge Murphy of Massachusetts has made a claim that DHS deported migrants to South Sudan without proper notice or opportunity to object that they were previously, where the administration was previously ordered to not do so until they were given due process. The administration seems to be maintaining that they did not get the notice of the order prior to the plane taking out. These pesky things called facts seem to suggest that that's not true. To the extent, if it is in fact true that Judge Murphy issued that order and that the executive department, Department of Homeland Security was aware of it and that plane took off anyway, that is in fact a rule of law violation. You have been to, that is the equivalent of you asked us and we told you no. Not there was no decision. But the claim is, here was the problem with that case. Even though it is pretty clear the judge believed that they violated the judge's order, he said he had no power to force them to necessarily return the individuals, even though they were being held in a third-party nation and I think in prisons. So, you know, he's basically saying my power was the power to prevent it. He claimed to not have the power to order it returned. So this one has been a problem more recently, and this is something that falls right within my bailiwick. When I was a JAG, it was not even questionable that there are at least 2 statutes that prevent using military individuals for domestic policing events. One is something we call, that governs the military, posse comitatus, right? That's the name of the law that says we can't do it. There's also something called the Insurrection Act, right? Which says the time in which you could do this would be when we're in a period of insurrection. There's also a little known exemption to this for martial law. One of the few times in the country we ever actually had military policing for domestic purpose was during Reconstruction. Why? Because in many cases in the South, there were no functioning courts or police. So de facto, the post-war state of the South during the Civil War was an exception. But right now, you should really only have military troops involved in any sort of domestic policing if there is some sort of attack on the United States or insurrection. So this has involved cases in California. There are now additional cases in Oregon and Illinois. All of these district courts have so far said it does not appear that the president's deployment of those troops is consistent with the existing state of the law. Now, what the administration is claiming is that the National Guard and troops they are deploying are not there for domestic policing purposes. They are there to protect federal buildings and to protect ICE and its property and its people in the execution of their duties. I will also tell you we have never seen the National Guard politicized in this way because most uses historically of National Guard forces require or have always been historically understood to require the state to request them. Which is to say he's deploying troops to places where the governor has not asked for it, which actually is seen of a bit of an encroachment on that sovereignty I mentioned to you still existed for the several states. So my sense is, when does this move from its current state to the shadow docket? Because we now have 3 jurisdictions, and I'm assuming the president is going to want an answer. Some of you may be familiar with Erwin Chemerinsky, the former dean of the UCI Law School, is now the dean at Berkeley, a very good friend of mine. We've written articles together. I was with him on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and I said to him, Dean Chemerinsky, where is the line that the court will draw where it says enough in terms of actions that appear to most of us to be violative of the plain language of statutes or the Constitution? And he said something shocking, which is he's like, I am not sure there is such a line. And then I'm like, well, then we do have a crisis of a constitutional order. We then have suggested there is no law to follow. But we will see. I'm assuming this will go on the shadow docket, and we will get an answer to it. We also have this was answered in a problematic way, but we've had these cases involving ICE actions. One, ICE summarily removing the temporary protected status for immigrants. The court basically said that's okay. They removed the lower court order. You also saw in California recently, we had a lower court district judge that stayed the ICE raids. The court, without a court opinion, lifted the stay. We have 2 opinions. Justice Sotomayor saying this basically is victimizing people based on race and national origin. And then you had another Justice, Kavanaugh, who said, well, what information would ICE use besides whether you look Mexican or speak Spanish or at a bus stop or a car wash? There's actually an older case called Brignone Ponce, which is about Border Patrol and appearance. And that case said, and this is why this is a problem, that case said you should not use appearance alone as a way to determine who should be stopped for fear of violating immigration statutes. But I will say the fact that the conservative majority overturned it without a majority opinion, and Kavanaugh was willing to put out there what I think many people find a quite disturbing interpretation, means we should not hold a lot of hope out if this ends up going up to the court. It seems to be that the court's going to allow racial profiling within the immigration context. Now, to be fair, it's not terribly different from what they allow in the policing context, because there's a case called Wren versus US, which says if the police cannot be held accountable for racially profiling someone if, in fact, the person was engaged in some underlying criminal offense, however small. So in other words, if I stop your car because you're a black man driving the car, but you are also going 2 miles over the speed limit, it's a good stop. Sorry to tell you, that's the law. Okay, so fine. Oh, that's wrong. Okay, last one. All right, here's the last one, and maybe, I actually think maybe this is the line. I'm hopeful this is the line. So in the last term, we had the Trump versus Casa case, which is the birthright citizenship case. but it was only brought up for the procedural question of the nationwide injunction. The court overruled the use of nationwide injunctions. This makes no sense to me, mostly because why should your rights on this question be different in California than they are in, like, Florida or Texas? But okay, so it's now back on they fast-tracked it back on the shadow docket on the substantive question. Right now, the US Constitution says you have citizenship in the United States if you are born in the United States, and it has one sentence after there talking about jurisdictional limits, which has never been thought to be anything that could be used to limit the earlier passage that says we have birthright citizenship. We, in fact, have to have had birthright citizenship. Why? That language is in the Constitution because of the Dred Scott case, which said that slaves and freed slaves were not citizens of the United States. We fought a whole freaking war for the right to say that slaves and the children of slaves were now United States citizens. And Trump actually weirdly knows this because he gave a press conference when he says, this isn't about illegal immigrants. That language is about slave babies. That is what he said. That language does not say it is limited to slave babies. That language says if you are born within the United States, you have citizenship. There is also an older case from the 1800s called Che Peng. And Che Peng was a case where the government alleged that babies born in the United States to Chinese permanent residents would not be citizens. In that case, the Supreme Court held that the status of the parents did not control the birthright of the children. The administration's current thinking is, but in Che Peng, those parents were, at least they had some temporary residency status. And the law as it's written now in his executive order, it's really aimed for people who are undocumented. Most legal theorists think that status shouldn't make a difference because the language of the Constitution is not about the status of the parents. The language of the Constitution is about whether you are born here or not. And so we will see. I think maybe that's where the line is. But that will be back in front of the court this term, and we'll learn if that's where the line is. I will say this. If we do away with birthright citizenship as we know it, which is to say, if we make a determination that there are now ways in which by executive order, the president can summarily change what we understand to be a constitutional precedent, I worry for both the specific outcome and the more general understanding of the balance of power between the executive and the people, because the Constitution is there for the protection of the people. So we'll see what happens. So I hope I have made you incredibly enthusiastic about the fact that not everything that a president does that we disagree with, that in fact may be out of line with the common interpretations of constitutional or statutory text, is a rule of law violation. There is some room for a president to act inconsistent with previous presidents, even inconsistent with our own understanding of the text. And the only time that becomes a rule of law violation is where you get a court order saying, we have interpreted this, this is what it means, these are the limits on what you can do. So rule of law violations exist only where it is that there's already been a judicial determination as to the understanding of the limit on their power. The thing I try to get my students to do is to not overreact to every sort of action and try to work through the difference between the legal and the normative understanding of what's happening. A lot of what's happened since January 20th in a kind of common sense normative way is upsetting because it is inconsistent with what we understand as historical practice, and it seems to be targeting people in a way that we've never seen before. However, well, I didn't even think to just say it's morally wrong, but that's pretty much in some ways a given. But in terms of how we're supposed to move forward, we are supposed to move forward hopefully trusting that when in fact courts do say what you've done is inconsistent with our interpretation, that what will happen is what has always happened, that the executive will comply. I will tell you though, and I'm writing something right now with Erwin about this, The only thing historically that has ensured that a president does not commit rule of law violations after a court has made a pronouncement is voluntary compliance. It's just, it has never been an issue before. Every time in history before where a president has been told you cannot do something, they've accepted it. We will see whether this is the first time we get a difference. Now, it's not always true in terms of governors, by the way. Quite famously, during the civil rights movement, there are governors who refused to integrate their schools, and that's actually one of the legitimate times when National Guard troops were sent in to force a court order. But we have never seen that at the level. We have literally never seen a president be told, you cannot do something, it violates the law, and then choose to ignore it. They have always, including President Bush, he saw the writing on the wall with the TSP and discontinued it. But if we get to the point where a court says you can't do it, and then the president ignores it, we really will be in a constitutional crisis. Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Barnes?
So assuming there's a violation that occurred and Trump ignores it, he's already been granted immunity.
Another terrible case I didn't talk about. So this is the parade of horribles Justice O'Connor talked about in U.S. v. Trump, which is in terms of a criminal response, if he's disobeying within the scope of his duties as president, he would be immune from prosecution for it. Now, here's what a constitutional scholar would say. But he's not immune from impeachment. The problem is that really doesn't stick with him. But yes, the answer to it would be, it's not going to be a criminal prosecution. It's going to have to be an impeachment, because that case has made pretty clear that executive things he does within the scope of his authority as the executive are not going to be subject to criminal prosecution.
Anybody back here have a question? Usually people in the back don't get much time. Okay, well, back to the front I go. Okay, I tried. Okay, Gary, what do you have? What's your question?
I think this is a sharp one here, so be ready.
Okay.
If a court rules that the president violated the rule of law, Congress and the House especially has the power of the purse to make sure taxpayer monies can't be used to do it again, correct?
Yes.
What if Johnson never reconvenes the House?
So there is a process for that too, right? So the problem is there's language set out in the Constitution that sets the terms for Congress, including when it's supposed to reconvene and when it goes on recess. And so while the president is largely immune, the Speaker of the House is not immune should there be a suit claiming that he's violating the Constitution, right? If what you're doing is failing to comply with the constitutional requirement on when Congress is required to be in session. And there have been cases that have litigated the requirements of congressional sessions, mostly as a function of dictating presidential power for recess appointments, right? But if the court will say that's something that is justiciable, which means the court has the power to review.
Okay, and I want to thank the two previous questioners. Questions only, no narratives, right? No
That was fair.
anecdotes. I know
was
they
a
did a good job. They
presupposition.
did a really good job. No, they did. They asked the question.
I was going to ask about the due process that doesn't appear to be happening for the
Oh, boy.
people being disappeared.
Okay, so here's the thing, just so you know, 14th Amendment has three important protective clauses. Only two of them anybody know about. So the Due Process Clause, which says before the government disturbs your life, liberty, or your life, liberty, or property, they must give you due process of the law. The Equal Protection Clause says we are entitled to equal protection of the laws. And then there's a third clause that is privileges or immunities clause, which is basically that the character of your state citizenship cannot vary from state to state, or rights and privileges for your state. So due process clause is supposed to be followed. It's actually the order that Judge Murphy, what he said was absenting or disappearing people is a violation because why? You are disturbing them in their life, liberty, and of those, liberty is the one, right? Liberty or property. Liberty can have two meanings. Liberty can be your actual freedom. Liberty can also be those things that apply to rights we call fundamental, right? So when they say a liberty interest, here it's really their actual freedom. And before you can take me and disappear me or move me, I get basic due process. Basic due process requires two things. I get notice of what I'm being charged with or what's going on. I get a hearing. At the hearing, I'm allowed to allege you can't do this. Now, let me say this. One of the things that happened that actually was a good thing during the war on terror is we started off picking up people, holding them in places because we were afraid of terrorism. The court was actually at its finest moment in a set of cases post 9/11 where they said, even if there's a true threat of terrorism, you cannot do away with due process. The Hamdi case. You must give people notice and a hearing and allow them to explain why they're not an unlawful enemy combatant. If we can give you notice and a hearing to tell us why you're not a terrorist, we can give you notice and hearing around your status as someone who may or may not be in the country unlawfully. The problem is that they're being judge and jury because they're saying the basis for the absenting them is a determination that they belong to gangs and terrorist organizations. Well, on what basis are you making that decision? Due process ensures that you're not making mistakes when you do that, as has been the case with several people, right? They've basically been accused of being members of gangs and other terrorist networks. They've been moved, and it's pretty clear from some of the evidence that there's not strong support for those claims, and if you got basic due process, it would be okay. There is a problem. The actual INA, the Immigration and Nationalization Act, basically says there is a basic right to due process for people who are subject to immigration processing. So I'm wondering why the immigration isn't up, why the courts aren't upholding the sort of statutory component from the INA on that.
Okay, one more question, and then Dr. Barnes will let him go. He's been here a very long time. And before that, I want to make sure that we give him a big round of applause after our question. And just a reminder that all of these folks that come to speak to us, completely voluntary. We are blessed to have these kind of speakers of this quality that give up their entire evening after teaching all day to come and teach us. It's just amazing, isn't it? Okay, one more question.
Thank you again. And I had a question around due process. If we think about two very recent events, one is ICE on rooftops shooting people with pepper bullets who are peacefully protesting, and one died and a number were injured. The other is off the coast of Venezuela or wherever. We're in international waters.
Oh, okay.
And we're blowing up boats that may have fentanyl, or they may be, going to visit somebody on another island.
Okay, now you've opened a can of worms. Okay, so I'll simply say with regard those ICE cases are basically really not those are use of force cases, right? Where when our federal agents limited in the force they can use, basically it's the same kind of rule that governs policing, right? You're not supposed to use force unless you yourself understand there to be a threat, and the force is supposed to be proportional to the threat, right? And so the problem is the allegation would be excessive uses of force. There's a problem with that though, right? Because it's very, the Supreme Court has been very deferential to police agencies in deciding what level of force is necessary and in deciding when the threat exists. The real issue there has been the protesters claiming there was no threat of violence or there was peaceful protests, and the claims that there needed to be no use of force, where the administration claiming, the folks in ICE were being placed under threat. So that's really an interpretive issue, not related to due process. it's related to use of force. And now I have to say something really funny. The Venezuelan issue is also related to use of force, but not in the domestic policing context, but something I did quite a bit in my former life, which is international armed conflict and use of force. So one of my jobs was that I was a Navy lawyer for what is essentially Southern Command, which is used to be the geographical commander-in-chief that has the waters off South America and the Caribbean. As a lawyer for Southern Command, my job was to watch the tactical environment and threat environment and request the ability to use force when we were allowed to use force within the drug interdiction mission. And how that works is, because of posse comitatus, U.S. Navy vessels are not allowed to do policing, even in international waters, if it is for a domestic law enforcement purpose. But that is why all of the ships that deploy to that part of the world carry something called law enforcement detachments, which are manned by Coast Guard folks. And the Coast Guard folks are supposed to board, they call VBS, visit, board, search and seizure. They're supposed to visit, board, search and seizure to determine if people are running drugs. And then here's what you're supposed to do. Arrest them and turn them over to the nation that is closest in terms of the domestic waters that are closest to the place when they've been interdicted. I worked for that organization for 3 years, and only one time was there ever a use of force after a confirmed drug runner sped away from the Coast Guard and was shooting at them. And we actually had to call up to the National Command Authority. You first call and say, we request permission for warning shots, right, to slow them. And then if they don't, you even have to request permission for what we call disabling shots. The whole doctrine says the military is supposed to not take the lead. It's the Coast Guard. The whole doctrine says we are trying to interdict it and not use force as if it is a military operation. Because the use of force for military operations is supposed to be very different and subject to rules of engagement. Those people in those boats are not the military of a foreign government. So I would normally say, in my humble opinion as a former JAG who advised admirals and lawyers in this case, that this seems problematic. But I will say instead, the fact that the admiral responsible for carrying out these orders resigned last week, because he could not reconcile the orders he was given for using force in that way with his understanding of the existing rule of law, tells us what we need to know. But it's a very, my sense is either we will see a lot of that in the near term if we continue to have orders that appear to violate our historical understandings, or at some point there will be enough pushback where perhaps even the administration will be more thoughtful about it. What I have seen in and around the waters of Venezuela, I would imagine we will be subjected to claims of violating international law. The problem is we won't subject ourselves to the jurisdiction of any court that's allowed to hear the case, but we have been previously and we will be again. This does not look like anything. And I used to do that particular job. That does not look like anything that historically we have done. The amount of force, using force at all rather than interdicting and arresting, and it seems to be targeting boats from a particular nation, right? Not drugs more generally. So this one is very problematic, but it's very hard to see where we would get a case in our domestic courts that raises, because you need somebody who is injured by it to be able to come to court to argue whether the president has the power to do it. So yes, we have another situation, but I'm going to let you guys go.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes, very much. Much appreciated. We have one more order of business. We have the result of the election here. Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience. Okay, the result. Yeah. Okay, so the results of the election tonight, we have for the 71st, our representatives will be Peggy O'Neill, Jim Batts, Ken Johnson, Patty Ebel, Joe Simon, Cindy Ashley, Mike Ebel, Michelle Graham, Dan Graham, Nancy Aziz, Judy Fike, Nancy Livingston, Carol Voronovich, Jacqueline Martin, Sam Penrod, Stephen Nelson, Justine White, Randall Simmons, Walt Lawson, Stacy Holmes, Kristen Wilcox, Corinne Akahoshi, and the alternate will be John Papa Pietra. For the 72nd, we have Ted Pearl, Heather Gilbert, Kathy Udich, Janet Segner, Ann Owens, Herb Cohen, Marty Lubetkin, Herb Chatterton, Allison Turbich, and the alternate will be Francine Toth. For the 74th, we have Marion Simon. Thank you all for voting, much appreciated, and thank you to the election committee for all their work.
If you need help figuring out the directions for distributing flyers, go see the people over on the side by the blue poster.